So yes, explant should be included in your risk analysis, should not be excluded. But how? The question is how? Do you want to include that as a harm, which means that you have to assign it a severity level? Or do you want to look at it as a hazardous situation? And if you could look at explant as a hazardous situation, that gives you a real way to do this in your risk analysis and see before and after easily. That could be much easier way of doing this, so more of a pragmatic approach. Well, hello everyone, I'm Naveen Agarwal and I'm so excited to welcome all of you again to our weekly live discussion. Thank you for joining, and if you're joining for the first time, we do this every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. So if you like these types of discussions, mark it on your calendars and make sure you join our discussions. Well, I'm so excited to be with you again, and I want to invite you, as you are joining, to take a moment to just briefly introduce yourself. Where are you joining from? In the chat, please say hello to me and everybody else who is going to be joining today. Let us know where you are joining from and what is your role in the quality management system or a risk management process. Greg, hello. Thank you for joining. I'm glad to see you again. I hope you're doing well. So friends, today I'm excited to discuss with you a very interesting scenario. This scenario relates to the analysis of risks related to a medical device explant. Now, for one reason or another, we may have to explant a medical device in a secondary surgical procedure that was implanted in the first procedure. So this is kind of a complex case, and in many situations, unfortunately, it is a pretty common occurrence. Keep in mind that many times a physician may decide to keep the medical device still implanted. So it might be a very individual decision given the benefit-risk balance for that specific patient. So we are not going to talk about the specific patient benefit-risk scenario. We are talking about in general. How do we treat the matter of explant during our risk analysis? That is the question we're going to talk about. Okay, Steve, thank you for joining. You are joining us from Twin Cities and you are a Chief Clinical Officer. Thank you for joining. In fact, Steve, since you are a clinician, your advice and your opinion would actually be very valuable. So please make sure you are contributing in the chat freely anytime. Shri, again, thank you for joining from Maryland. I welcome all of you. So guys, we're going to talk about explant scenario, and I will share with you a LinkedIn poll I did on this particular topic. We'll go through the responses, what people are talking about it. Again, let me say, there is no right or wrong answer to this question. Every scenario is different. What I'm interested in learning from you is how you treat this scenario in your risk analysis. And can you share some best practices with all of us? Maybe some challenges that you encounter when you have to manage explants and a scenario of explant in different situations. So before I go forward, by the way, let me very quickly touch upon a few key points of housekeeping. They're very important. This is an open forum. So as much as I really appreciate your participation, be aware it's an open forum. So do not share any proprietary or public business sensitive information. Second, let's be respectful to each other. This is not for debate or argument. We are here to learn from each other. And finally, anything that we talk about today should not be considered as regulatory advice. So having said that, let's jump into it. Okay, Tuba, you are also joining us you are in quality assurance and you are specializing in risk management. Fantastic. So Tuba, we would love to hear your opinion and perspective also. Okay, Janardhan, you are in QA and you are looking to learn more about risk management. Fantastic. You have come to the right place. Make sure you are asking your questions also and participating in the chat with everybody. So let's look into the slides. Only a few slides. I want to set the stage with you, and then let's talk about this topic. So I asked this question on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago because I was very curious about this. Do you consider a second surgical procedure, which is an explant, due to device related issues? Now here I was specific. Explant can occur for one reason or another, but in this question I was specific. Due to device related issues in the first procedure as an explicit harm in your master harms list. That was the question. And I presented a scenario in my post for people to just get the context, but it was supposed to be very general. So let's see what people said. Well, 81% of the respondents said yes, they would consider this as an explicit harm in their master harms table. 8% said no, and depends, about 11%. There were a total of about 74 responses, and by no means this is a scientific survey. It is not a scientific survey. It is just to gather some perspective from people in my network. And there was a lot of conversation, but as you can see, a majority opinion is that this should be treated as an explicit harm. But 8% of the respondents are also saying no, it should not be treated. So we want to hear both views. Just because a majority of people are saying it should be an explicit harm doesn't make it right or wrong. Again, this is not a question of right or wrong. So before I go, and make sure you are sharing your opinion in the chat right now if you did not take this survey or did not participate in this poll. So I want to share with you just one more slide before we jump into our discussion. And I share this just to create a context and perspective. And I share this process in my training and workshops and courses. It's very important for us to get these basic concepts right. And let's understand how a patient may experience harm. Usually, there is an initial event. It may not be a failure of a device, but something happens to start the whole chain of events. That leads to a sequence of events, and that leads to a hazardous situation where the patient or the user is exposed to one or more hazards. Now, I'm not going to jump to harm right away. I know this is what we're going to do. But when a hazardous situation occurs during a procedure, the doctor doesn't give up, or the physician doesn't give up. There is an intervention. And that intervention actually may lead to another sequence of events which may involve device or may not involve the device. And the whole cycle could continue multiple times. So when we are thinking about an explant, that's a secondary procedure. But this chain of events or this diagram would be applicable in the first procedure as well. And of course, it is the exposure to hazards in a hazardous situation that will lead to patient harm. Okay, so this was just to set a context and perspective about how we're going to look at this problem. Whether we should treat this as a harm or something else. Majority of the people in the poll responded that they would consider an explant scenario as an explicit harm in their master harms list. What are the benefits of that approach? What are the challenges of that approach? Please share your opinion. And again, if you did not get a chance to participate in this poll, the poll is closed now on LinkedIn. Make sure you express. Okay, great. So I have a comment from Erin. First of all, Erin, thank you for joining. It's great to see you again. You are saying, I think it also depends on whether explantation and reimplantation of the device is expected as part of the therapy provided by the device, and something that is discussed with patients upfront versus an unexpected explant related to the failure of a device. So you are differentiating, Erin, whether it is part of the plan or unplanned. Shri, you are saying it depends. If the explant is because of a design failure, it will have to be dealt under device development. Patient-related factors may be treated like P2 in IVDs out of the control of the manufacturer. And Greg, you are sharing that it should be included in the foreseeable scenario. Thank you for sharing all these perspectives. So let me share with you a few more slides. Maybe it provides a little bit more clarity and would again welcome your thoughts on that. And again, I'll emphasize, it is not right or wrong. It's just the way I'm thinking about this scenario and would love to hear your perspective. Okay, a few basic things. What is an explant? Now I looked up FDA website and I can find the definition of device explantation in Annex F. For those of you who may not be familiar, FDA has actually provided these annexes under the MDR Adverse Events Codes reporting page. And in Annex F, which relate to health impact, they define a level 1 term, surgical intervention. Level 2 term is device explantation, and it's defined as patient required a corrective invasive procedure to remove a device or parts fragments of a device. That's how it's defined. Let's look at other surgical intervention terms that FDA has included in this annex to see where it fits. They're looking at additional surgery, amputation, device repositioning, device revision or replacement, modified surgical procedure, more complex surgery, prolonged surgery, surgical procedure delayed. These are the other level 2 terms FDA is including in this annex under the big level 1 term, surgical intervention. So these are all different types of surgical interventions. Now, they also provide an explanation which is good for us to understand here. Terms, codes in this annex describe the resulting consequences of the medical device adverse event incident on the person affected. The resulting consequences can include final patient outcomes, including death is a patient outcome, and or interventions or procedures required as a result of the clinical signs, symptoms, and conditions captured using Annex E. It is likely that it will be necessary to use multiple terms. It is quite likely. So my view on this is that I like to look at harm terms in our master harms list in terms of the clinical signs or symptoms described in Annex E. This is my view, and again, not a right or wrong view. Would love to hear your perspective. Annex F is all about other things, other patient effects or health impact that should be considered appropriately on a case-by-case basis, and over a period of time, maybe it informs your risk analysis in a certain way. So this is what Explant is in terms of its definition. So let's look at these two different sequences of events, right? Initial surgical procedure, we talked about this map. This map is no different in the second surgical procedure, whether planned or unplanned, it's no different. So initial trigger event may be different in these two scenarios, but potential harms, the clinical symptoms or signs remain the same. Unless informed, here's a disclaimer, unless informed by post-market surveillance that may indicate new clinical harms specifically associated with an explant procedure not currently identified in your master harms list. This is the way I would look at it, is that hopefully you have set up your master harms list to be fairly complete and comprehensive, and that is best done in consultation and collaboration with your clinical experts who have actual field experience with the device. Build it to the best of your ability. Look up Annex E related and find terms related to your medical device. That's the way to set up the master harms list. Now you are collecting post-market data and you are learning about explants, and they are also reporting some new harms that you have not considered before. In that scenario, you may have to add those terms to the master harms list. So how do we reduce the risk of explant? That's a question you might get asked. So my first view is that recognize that explant is not a risk, because risk has two components, probability and severity. What severity do we associate with an explant? I heard a lot of comments about it depends. So the outcome, the procedure is explant, and as a result of that procedure, the patient may experience one or more harms of different severity. So I don't know which severity to assign to explant. That is why I don't like to use the word risk for explant. However, it is an event. So what I like to look at it is that treat explant as a unique hazardous situation and identify and implement control measures to reduce the occurrence of explants, which could be treated as P1. P1 is the probability of occurrence of a hazardous situation. You can review the post-market data to identify relevant factors. It could be device related, use related, or patient factors related, such as pre-existing conditions. And again, the time may be different. More time may have elapsed between the first procedure and the second procedure. And as a result, the hazardous situation may be different for different patients. So this is what I wanted to share with you. I do have one more slide that I will maybe get to towards the end of our discussion today, if time allows. So now Aaron, you have an additional comment. You are saying you agree, I have historically preferred to have only Annex E codes in the harms list. But I do see there are certain cases where you may need to have Annex F codes to adequately capture all risks. I think, Aaron, you are making a good point. What I would say is that then try to define the outcome of events or procedures described in Annex F in clinical terminology. And I recommend to people look up MEDRA, look up codes which may be more relevant in MEDRA dictionary, look up IMDRF codes. But explant is more of a generic term applied to a certain surgical intervention, planned, unplanned, for reason, without reason. Maybe you have a recall. very safe, very serious recall, and now you are thinking about whether doctor should explant the device or not. It's a very difficult decision. So for risk, now we are not talking about case by case decisions. That is adverse event reporting. That is a totally different conversation. We are talking about how to treat this scenario for risk analysis and looking at your risk mitigation factors or control factors. So what I would say is that if you feel that there are some certain outcomes specifically related to explant or other similar procedures which are not really applicable in the first procedure, then look up the appropriate terminology in Annex E or MEDRA. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, Peter, thank you for sharing this comment. You have a comment here that it shall be included anyway. I think there should be an explanation why the explantation is necessary, defective device, and you have to weigh the risk of the intervention against leaving the device, for example, nanoparticles. Absolutely right. Individual clinical decision is always based upon the balance of benefit and risk for that patient, and it is best done by that doctor. We cannot do that when we do risk analysis in our risk management process. We look at overall big issues. So yes, explant should be included in your risk analysis, should not be excluded. But how? The question is how? Do you want to include that as a harm, which means that you have to assign it a severity level? Or do you want to look at it as a hazardous situation, which is what I was talking about in the slides I just presented to you. If you treat that as a hazardous situation, you can look up factors. You can investigate based on post-market data. What are the factors contributing to that hazardous situation? Device-related factors, use-related factors. They might be misuses or use errors that may lead to explantation down the line. Or patient-related factors. You identify those as part of your investigation and do all you can to reduce the probability of occurrence of this hazardous situation. Now, if you leave, that's actually a very pragmatic way of handling this, I believe. Again, look forward to hearing from you what your perspective is, because you can do something about P1. You cannot really do anything about P2, unfortunately. P2 is harm occurring after the hazard, likelihood of the harm occurring after hazardous situation has occurred. If it has occurred, harm may occur, right? That's what. So what you can do from a manufacturer perspective, do all you can to minimize P1, right? And if you could look at explant as a hazardous situation, that gives you a real way to do this in your risk analysis and see before and after easily. That could be much easier way of doing this, so more of a pragmatic approach. Please keep your comments and thoughts coming. Again, this is not a right or wrong conversation. It's more of a discussion with you because I believe it's not a very straightforward, simple situation. And a lot of my thinking, by the way, has been informed by my conversations and working directly with clinicians over the last, I would say, at least 5 years, where we have talked about other topics also, relevant topics, and they have included the scenario of explant. How do we handle that? So it has been informed by that. And again, it continues to be informed by feedback and conversations with you all. So I want to share with you one more slide, if I may, to just close the conversation on this. So I would offer these best practices to you based on my experience and understanding. Identify if new clinical harms are being reported during explant procedures that are generally not reported in the initial procedure. And this is why it's very important for us to really work very closely with our complaints handling department, with our clinicians. We are quality engineers or regulatory folks, or let's say some project managers. We don't have the insight into what harm terms should be included in our risk analysis, and we have to continually build that. So if we are hearing in the post-market phase that the explant cases actually are associated with some harms that are not generally reported in the first initial procedure, we should be very alert to that, and we should review if we have included them in our master harms list or not. Now the second situation is that in the explant procedures, we are not hearing about new harms, but we are hearing about same harms or expected potential harms, but their severity level seems to be much higher than what we had anticipated before. In that case, we need to know what severity level we have indicated in our master harms list. And I actually advise people to use only one severity level per harm in the master harms list, not 2 or 3. review the list. It is a good idea to use only the maximum severity level associated with each harm term, maximum potential severity level. So if during the explant procedures you are hearing that similar harms of higher severity are being reported, you may have to adjust your severity level. I just talked about the maximum severity level. And finally, I would offer to you, treat explants as a unique hazardous situation, identify applicable factors, and implement control measures to reduce rates of occurrence. And you can show that in your risk analysis documents such as FMEAs or hazard analysis documents. Whatever instruments that you use, you can indicate how you have implemented controls to specifically address the situation with explants. Erin, you have additional comment here. If explant is a hazardous situation, then your list of harms will be long depending on the type of explant, plain bleeding, infection, damage to organs, all the adverse events that could come from anesthesia. So it could be a cumbersome list of harms. You are absolutely right, Erin. This applies to all scenarios. Any hazardous situation may be linked with multiple harms, not just explants. So you have to manage multiple harms associated with the same hazardous situation in almost all scenarios. And how you do it, there are some good practices that we can share in future discussions. Peter, you are saying fully agree on your perspective to treat that as a hazardous situation. Thank you for expressing your opinion. Love to hear from other folks as well. What do you think? And again, I want to emphasize all over again, I don't have all the answers. I just provide to you very transparently my perspective and the rationale behind my thinking. How we implement that in our risk management process depends on a lot of factors. What is existing out there already? Can we make this work in a way which is consistent and non-ambiguous? Inconsistency, I believe, is the biggest problem today we have in our practice. So there's no right or wrong answer. If you treat this as a hazardous situation to begin with, maybe you're okay. But if you're already doing it in a certain way, I don't want you to go and run and remediate all your documents. Don't do that. That's a lot of wasted effort. We can sort this problem in many different ways. Erin, agree? Thank you. Okay. Janardhan, you're asking, is this session recorded? Yes, absolutely. You will find this recording on LinkedIn and other places as well. Okay, folks, that's all. We are almost at the end of our conversation today. We typically meet for 30 minutes or so. I know all of you are very busy. So usually these are quick 30-minute conversations. Recordings are available on LinkedIn and also on my YouTube channel. With that, I want to thank all of you for joining again. Please keep this coming. Share with others who you think might benefit for these types of conversations. And again, if you cannot join live, the recordings are available. And I invite you to continue the conversation on LinkedIn in your comments. Thank you again for joining, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week.